Hi everyone, welcome to Power BI Summit. My name is Indira Bandari and today I am going to cover Power BI data flow use cases and best practices. First of all, I would like to thank our sponsors, Microsoft, Radacad and Inforiver, for making this Power BI Summit happen. Hope you are all enjoying the Power BI Summit sessions so far, and you will get something out of this session as well. A little bit about me. I have a master's degree in statistics and have been in the data field for over 18 years now, and have been working on Microsoft Stack, BI Stack for all the way through. I have a passion to teach kids all about technology, and this passion has resulted in Microsoft recognizing me as a Microsoft Data Platform MVP, as well as I became a director of a charitable trust called Kids Tech Charitable Trust, which I use to teach kids all about technology, which includes Power BI as well. And if you want to contact me, I am on Twitter as Indira Bandari and on LinkedIn as Indira-Bandari. Okay, let's look at today's agenda. I'm just going to go through what Power BI data flows are and a little bit of a demo as to how to create data flows, and also I will talk about in what scenarios can you use data flows, and also what are some of the best practices that you can follow when creating data flows. Now let's see what Power BI data flows are. Most of the self-service business intelligence tools don't include a data warehouse or a data lake with them. Although they will integrate with various data warehouses or data lakes that are built by data professionals, the data professionals, they don't allow analysts or business users perform data warehousing tasks, which is extract, transform and loading tasks. This is where Power BI data flows come into picture. Data flows can fill an important gap between purely self-service data prep and formal data warehouse solutions. If you don't have a comprehensive data warehouse to meet your analytical and reporting requirements, but need to provide more data quality control over standardized entities, incorporating data flows might be the way to go. So now let's see what Power BI data flows are. Data flows are a capability in Power BI that allow users to build reusable data sets. And these data sets are called entities. And data flow is nothing but Power Query online. Unlike Power BI data sets, which are implemented as analysis services tabular models, data flows are implemented as folders and files in Azure Data Lake storage. Data flow is a Power Query process that runs in the cloud independent from any Power BI reports. So the objective is to create a single source of truth by forcing analysts to connect to the data flows rather than connecting to the underlying systems. This will provide the control over which data is accessed and how data is exposed to the report creators. And you can also map the data to industry standards definitions, and this will enable you to create tidy views. So that is the theory of the Power BI data flows. Now let's try and visualize this, whatever I have said here. So your Power BI data flows can connect to various data sources here. And once you connect to the data source using Power Query Online, they get stored into what is called a Azure Data Lake storage. And these are stored as entities. So each one is an entity in the Microsoft Common Data Model. Once the data flow is created, this can be used in the data sets when you create Power BI desktop files. You can create data sets, and these data sets can in turn be used in creating reports and dashboards. That is a high level visualization of how data flows work. Now, in order to create a Power BI data flow, it can be created in Power BI Service Workspace, but unfortunately it's not available in my workspace. That means you need to have a Pro license, Power BI Pro license for creating data flows. How can we create data flows? You can create data flows in 4 different ways. You can define new tables, or you can use linked tables, or you can use computed tables, or even you can import some data or import-export feature also you can use. When you click on create data flows, this is the structure that you get. You can either start creating your data flow using define new entities. So when you click on define new entities, you can choose a data source out of the number of entities and number of connectors that are available, and then create the data flow. You can also link to entities from other data flows. So at that stage you can use this box to connect to add linked entities. And if you want to import something from your workspace, then you can choose this one, import model. And also if you want to use a common data model, then you can click on this one. Now let's try and look at a demo of creating a data flow. I am on the Power BI service. Just remember that you can't create data flows in Power BI desktop, so you need to log into Power BI service. And I am in a workspace called demo. If you don't have a workspace, you can just go and create the workspace here. So I can go workspace and then create workspace. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to cancel this one, and then I'm going to use my demo workspace. Here you see something called data sets and data flows. You can either click on that, or you can just click on the new here, and in the drop down you see a lot of options, out of which data flow is also an option. So click on the data flow, which will take you to the Power Query Online editor. So like I showed you in the PowerPoint presentation, you are having 4 options to choose from. So I'm going to add a new table as a data flow. So I'm going to click on the new table add new table, and this opens all the connectors that are available in the Power Query Online editor. I'm going to connect to Excel workbook, which is I think most of you are familiar with. It is the AdventureWorks Excel workbook, which has a date dimension. So I'm going to create a date dimension in the data flow. So I'm going to choose my login method, because I'm going to log into my my OneDrive. I've chosen browse, and then now this is the workspace. This is the file that I'm going to import. So I'm just going to choose that, and once I choose that, I select it. And because it is on OneDrive, browse OneDrive, because it is on OneDrive, I don't need a data gateway to mention. Otherwise you need to have a gateway credentials mentioned. You need to mention the gateway credentials if you are using an on-premise data. And authentication level is organizational data at this stage. So now everything is set for me to create the data flow. So I'm just going to create next. Click next. Sorry. Yeah, navigator is appearing, and these are all the tabs that are all the sheets that are available in the Excel workbook that I have imported. This has customer data, product. There are a lot of information that is available. What I am interested is in the date dimension. So I'm just going to just preview this data, and date dimension date sheet has this. These are the columns that are available. So I'm just going to go transform data here, and once I do that, I will just check whether everything looks all right. If it doesn't look all right, I want to do some transformations. So here it says date key, date, everything is looking good, all the columns are good. So I'm just going to go and save and close. Once I go there, it's validating the queries and then loading the data into the data flow. I'm just going to give a name to it. I'll just say date dimension, and I'm just going to save that. Once it saves, then I can refresh the data in there. So I'm just going to click on refresh now. Once we refresh, the table is created. If you want to have multiple tables in the data flow, you can add more tables by clicking on add tables, or if you want to edit the existing tables, you can click on edit tables. It's going to open nothing but the Power Query Online editor. Okay, so that's creating the data flow. So let's have a look at how we can use that data flow in creating a report. So I'm just going to open my Power BI desktop. So I'm going to get data from the same file, because I just have one file in, and it has a lot of tabs in it. I'm just going to import that file using the Power BI desktop, and which will open Power Query again. So these are the sheets that are available in the Excel workbook. I just want customer data and sales data. I'm not going to import the date dimension because I'm going to import that date dimension from the data flow. So I'm just going to transform data. Once I do that, I can see both the tables here. These are both looking good for me. Now I want to get the data flow from the demo workspace that I have created. So for that, I just go into new source, and then I just go more, click on more, which will open the connectors dialog box. Yeah, this is the get data dialog box which you have seen earlier. So here I'm going to click on Power Platform, and there is something called Power BI Data Flows here. So once you click on that and then go connect, what will happen is connect to my workspace, and then it is showing the demo workspace where I have created the data flow just now. See, this is the date dimension that I have created. I'm just going to expand that and then click on the date table or date entity, which is called as date entity. Once clicking on that, I'm just checking whether the data is looking good. So I'm just going to load that. Now the date table is loaded from the data flow. I'm happy with that. So I just close and apply in the Power BI desktop. So you can see all the tables here. They're still loading, but yeah. So if I look in the data here, data section, the customer data is there, date data is there and also the sales data is there. So I can go into the relationship and then add the relationship between the sales and the date dimension that I have created. So I want to add date to the order date key. So I'm just going to check where the order date key is here. So date key and the order date key are now linked. So that's what it is. So that completes my demo on how to create the data flow and use it in Power BI desktop. Now let us look at what the data flow use cases can be. In many cases, data is not imported into Power BI from a central storage location, but is imported over and over again directly from the source, and this is done in various reports. This approach may make sense to a limited extent. However, as soon as a lot of reports repeatedly access the same source, and in worst case even simultaneously, sometimes we might put the refresh simultaneously for the same data sources, the implications from the source system and the performance of the BI system can be impacted. So in order to avoid this, interim data storage is usually used, and that this can be a persistent storage in an additional database or a data warehouse. And the Power BI data flows are now available that we can use this for this scenario. The second one is one data flow can be used for multiple Power BI reports. For example, we have done a data flow for the date dimension, and I'm sure you use the date dimension in each and every report that you create, in every Power BI report that you create. So that data flow can be used so that there will be one source of truth for that. And also there is a consideration for different schedule refreshes. So if data flows are used in different reports, the data sets can be refreshed at different schedules. Let's see a little bit in detail what this means. A centralized data warehouse means you get the staging or transformation in a data flow, and then which is then stored in Azure Data Lake, and from the Azure Data Lake you can use the data in creating the sales reports and the product reports. In the next scenario, usually what happens is you use the same source and create multiple reports. For example, I use the customer and sales data in my example of creating the data flow, the Power BI report using the data flow, and I can create a sales report. And using the same source of data, because it has a lot of tabs in it, I'm going to use different tabs and then create a product report. But I'm using the same data source. Is this efficient? No, I don't think so. So what we can do at this stage is we can create one data flow which can contain the date tables and the product tables, or whatever dimension that you repeatedly use, and then use those data flows into the report by using the remaining data from the Excel sheet, and then create the sales report and the product report. This will be more efficient because you can schedule different refreshes as well. So you have the data flow which refreshes every day, and sales report can refresh twice a day if there are some sales targets that need to be achieved, and product report can be refreshed only weekly, where product data doesn't change on a daily basis, it can change on a weekly basis. So these are the different use cases that we can use for data flows. Now there is a feature that you need to enable in the admin portal in the tenant settings in order for you to create and use data flows, and that is there in the admin portal. To get to the admin portal, you need to have the Power BI administrator role, and within that there is a section called data flow settings where you can enable this. You can enable either for the entire organization, or you can just add some groups so that only those groups that belong to those users that belong to that group have access to create the data flows. Now let's look at some of the best practices for creating a data warehouse using data flows. Designing a data warehouse is one of the most common tasks that you can do with a data flow. So one of the key points in any data integration systems is to reduce the number of reads for the source operational system, which is the transactional system. So in the traditional data warehouse architecture, this reduction is done by creating a new database called a staging database. The purpose of the staging database is to load data as is from the data source into the staging database. So we should follow the same principle in creating data warehouse using data flows. So what we need to do is just create a set of data flows that are responsible for just loading data as is from the source system, and only for the tables that you need. Don't take all the tables, but just only take the tables that you need and load as is and mark them as staging data flows. The next one comes the transformation data flows. So after the staging data flows, you can use the data from the staging data flow to create the transformations that you need. And sometimes you can have a layered approach where you can logically separate the staging and transformation. Next comes the computed entities. So you use the computed entities as often as possible. Also, like any data warehouse, build a star schema, and also try and use unique key for your dimensions. Let's look at in more detail of each of these best practices. As discussed previously, it's better to create staging data flows. So what is staging data flows? So just loading the data from the data source as is into the staging data flows. So a data flow can contain multiple tables, so date dimension, product dimension, time dimension, etc. And these will be loaded into either Azure Data Lake storage or a Dataverse. Now, what are the benefits of this approach? So this will reduce the number of read operations from the source system. So whatever the hits that are going to apply, they will apply to the staging storage rather than the data source. And this will load, if the data is on premise, then this will reduce the load on the data gateways. And also having an intermediate copy of the data for reconciliation purposes, so that in case the source system changes, then you can have a reconciliation. And also the transformations can be independent of the source. So these are the advantages of having a staging data flows. Now coming to the transformation data flows. So when you separate staging from transformation, the transformation will be independent from the source. This separation helps if you are migrating the source system to a new system. All you need to do in that case is to change the staging data flows, and everything will flow through from the transformation to the report. And mostly the transformation data flows are likely to work without any problem. So this separation also helps in case the source system connection is slow. So when we go to the layered approach, a layered architecture is an architecture in which you perform actions in separate layers. The staging actions can be in staging layer, and the transformation actions can be in transformation layer. So trying to do actions in layers helps minimize the maintenance required. So if there is something wrong with the staging, just the staging can be fixed. And if there is something wrong with the transformations, only the transformation layer can be fixed. So that's why these two separations, if you notice the diagram, these two are like a layered approach in two separate boxes. By the way, all these diagrams are from Microsoft, so I have just reused them. And also the best practice is use computed entities as often as possible. So when you use the result of a data flow in another data flow, you are using the concept of a computed entity. So you get the data, so from the data source you perform the common transformations which is stored in Azure Data Lake, and from here if you use transformations and then create queries, then you can do a computed entity. So computed entity means getting data from an already processed and stored entity. So the same thing can happen inside a data flow. So when you reference an entity from another entity, then you can use the computed entity. So here the computed entity gets the data directly from the data source, and in this diagram here the computed entity gets the data from the staging or transformation data flows. Now the best data warehouse model is a star schema model that has dimensions and facts designed in a way to minimize the amount of time to query the data from the data model. So it is shaped like a star schema, fact in the middle, and all the dimensions towards the sides. So there will be a one-to-many relationship between the dimensions and the facts. Now coming to the unique key value, when building dimension tables, make sure you have a key for each dimension, so that it ensures that there are no many-to-many relationships, and there is a one-to-many relationship. You can create the key by applying some transformations if there is no unique key, to make sure a column or a combination of columns is returning unique rows. So for example, this date is made up of year, start of the year and end of the year, something like that. And then mark as a key is also very important in the transform section. When you highlight the column, you can just mark it as a key. And also the next one is do an incremental refresh for large fact tables. And for you to do an incremental refresh, you need the Power BI premium capacity. You can't do incremental refresh in pro version yet. So fact tables are always the largest tables compared to the dimensions, and to reduce the number of rows transferred for these tables, for large tables it is better to do just the incremental refresh for that entity compared to refreshing the entire data flow. So far we have seen best practices for creating data warehouse using Dataflows. Now let's see what the best practices are for reusing Dataflows itself. One of the best practices is separate data transformation data flows from staging. Use multiple workspaces. Give the right access. Endorsements of data flows, and also separate entities in multiple data flows. So separate staging and transformation data flows, like we have seen earlier. It's better to have a layered approach, which we discussed. Here in this place, if it's better for you to use the staging data flows and the transformation data flows as a layered approach. Now, use of multiple multiple workspaces. Separating staging and transformation data flows. If a data flow performs all the actions, it's hard to reuse its entities in other data flows or for other purposes. That's why it's better to have a staging data flow and a transformation data flow. So you can use the staging data flows for multiple transformation data flows as well. Now coming to the use of multiple workspaces. Each workspace is available only for members of that workspace. So if you build all your data flows in one workspace, you are minimizing the reuse of the data flows. So you can have a generic workspace like for date, time, currency, or product, and maybe date, time and currency as a general workspace, and a product workspace for product dimension, and an inventory workspace for a warehouse dimension. And then for the sales data, you can have a sales workspace. That way you can reuse each. You will be finding reusing these tables that are there in the general workspace all the time, because you need date dimension and time dimension and currency dimension in most of the reports. So it's better to use multiple workspaces. And in the same way, it's better to have, since you are creating multiple workspaces, then you can customize the access based on what each people need. So for some, the users may require only viewer access. For some, the viewers may require member access because they need to publish. But here, if they don't need, most of the time, if you create one date dimension, one time dimension and currency, you don't need any editing. Next comes the endorsements on the data flow. There can be many data flows created in a tenant organization, and it can be very hard for the users to know which data flow is most reliable. So authors of the data flow, or those who have the edit access to the data flow, can endorse. And what are these endorsements? These endorsements can be, you can say it is certified or promoted or even endorsed. So these levels of endorsement help users find reliable data flows easier and faster. So the data flows with a higher endorsement level appears first. And the Power BI administrator can delegate the ability to endorse data flows to the certified level to other people. Separating the data ingestion and the data transformation data flows that we talked about earlier, the staging and the transformation data flows. And another good reason is to have the entities in multiple data flows is when you want a different refresh schedule than the other tables, which we saw in the use cases. Now in this example, The sales table needs to refresh every 4 hours, and the date table refreshes every day, and the product mapping table refreshes every week, which we have seen earlier in the use cases scenario. So the multiple data flows can have tables transformed with the multiple schedule. So that's the best practices that I wanted to cover. So the main thing that you need to plan when you are trying to create a report is what is your data source structure, and how best can we use data flows so that the performance can be achieved and the refresh schedules also can be achieved, and what are the entities that we can create using data flows so that there is reuse that occurs, and then utilize the data flows along with the other data sources, and then create the report and make use of the efficiencies. Now I would like to recap. We have seen what Power BI data flows are, and also have created a data flow and then use that in the Power BI desktop report. And we have seen 3 scenarios where we can use data flows, and also we have seen best practices in 2 cases where one is the what are the best practices while creating a data warehouse using data flows, and what are the best practices for reusing data flows. So that's it from me. Thank you for being patient and listening to me. If you want to connect with me, that's my email address, and that's my LinkedIn, and then this is Twitter. On Twitter I'm at Indira Bandari, and then you can stay online for my live Q&A sessions. So see you in the live Q&A sessions. Thank you.